I just want to say as a quick disclaimer, I'm going to try not to talk too much during this particular panel because this is our shortest panel of the day, but it really shouldn't be. It should probably be about a two-hour long event. But, you know, we have Enoch on the far west coast of North America, and we have Shiv in London time. And so also, I think, Matt, you're on West Coast time as well, right?
Actually in Colorado today, but yeah.
Okay, in Colorado. So we got people in Mountain Time. This panel was particularly difficult just to get everyone on at a comfortable time. So thanks for Matt and Enoch for joining at 8 and 9 o'clock or 9 and 10 o'clock respectively. This particular panel and the objective here is to talk about data unions and data dividends from 3 different perspectives. On one end, we have the technologists, and Shiv Malik can introduce himself a bit more. He's with the Streamr network, which is an extraordinary blockchain platform, or platform as a service that is being amplified to basically create the technical infrastructure to better distribute dividends as a collective or as a data union, so to speak. Matt Prewitt is the president at the RadicalxChange Foundation, and they're doing extraordinary work as a think tank and a conference series of bringing together the brightest minds across the globe to create what is now, we think, a good policy framework structure that we can use not only here in North America, but in a lot of other places to start lobbying for more data rights, if you will, for me to be as vague as possible. And then we have Enoch Liang, who is the CEO of the Data Dividend Project, which some of you may have seen and sort of launched through Andrew Yang's Humanity Forward and a lot of the ideas that have come out of his campaign. But Enoch is a lawyer by trade, went to school with Andrew, and they're leading an initiative to start litigating on behalf of people that we would call in a collective, in a union, in a class, to argue for data redress and hopefully some dividends of sorts as a result. So it's everybody in a really tight nutshell. And in this brief 30 minutes, and I apologize again, I'd like to just go through each project and understand, what these guys are doing and have them sort of tell us what they're doing and what their teams are doing. And so if we could start with Matt. I met everyone here through, well, I guess not Enoch, but I met Shiv through Matt's institution. They're sort of serving as a policy platform. So I guess I'd like to start with Matt, what do you all have cooking at RadicalxChange? And what's this data policy? What is it called? Who are you planning to target with it? How can it be used? What are the bullet points of what you all are doing?
Sure. So we're looking at data policy from a number of different angles, but for the past year or so, we've been working on a sort of a proposal, a working paper proposal that we think embodies a lot of the best ideas in this space. And we call it the Data Freedom Act. The simple way of understanding what we are basically advocating for is this. It's that the major technology platforms have accrued enormous power, as everybody knows. We often talk about it in terms of money, but I think that money is just sort of a form of power. So thinking about power is in many ways the most, the clearest, most fundamental way of understanding what's going on. And the power that these platforms have accrued is power that really ought to belong to the public. There's sort of a market failure that's happened in the data economy that has allowed these platforms to accrue more power than they ought to have as private institutions. And there are a couple ways of thinking about how to deal with that. One way of thinking about how to deal with that is sort of top down. So come up with regulation, antitrust enforcement, break up the platforms, something like that. Now it's not inconceivable that could be a good approach, but for various reasons, I'm not particularly optimistic about it. So the other way of dealing with these kind of highly concentrated nodes of power that the public ought to have some say over, is a more bottom-up approach, which is to say, organizing the suppliers of the data that these companies depend upon, which is to say us. And so you can kind of think, and this is not something new in history. I mean, if you look at the history of the labor movement, you can think of labor organization as a sort of a bottom-up way of bringing public power to bear on otherwise private institutions. And something like that is what we hope to see happen in the data economy. But I do want to say that I think it's not just a matter of organization. It's going to require some changes in the legal background in order for this kind of bottom up organization to occur.
For sure. So from the bottom up, since you mentioned legal, I guess it makes it an easier transition to go straight to Enoch from there. So Enoch, what's the Data Dividend project first, and what are you all looking to achieve? And if that's too vague, fill me in on everything else that I sort of didn't ask for there.
Sure. Thanks, James.
Yeah.
So the Data Dividend Project is a nonprofit organization that is trying to achieve the bottom-up organization that Matt just talked about, right? So the DDP was based on the California Consumer Privacy Act's authorized agent provisions. And what DDP wants to do is to be the authorized agent for American consumers to take back power from the technology companies. I think that's the easiest way to describe it. And that's going to take two steps, right? I think the first step is education, and the second step is collective action. What do I mean by education? Well, for example, the social dilemma on Netflix that just came out. I heard your last panel talk about it. I highly recommend that everybody watch that, because nobody ever reads those 50-page consent agreements and licenses when they sign up for an app or they sign up for a website. Everybody just clicks accept, accept, accept. The social dilemma shows you what you are accepting, and the bargain is not good for us. Second step is collective action. What do I mean by that? Well, I think there's a reason why there's so much discussion around data unions, such as your organization, James. And Matt's organization was actually, I think, founded by Glenn Weil, who wrote a paper with Jaron Lanier talking about essentially data unions, data collectives. And the reason that collective action is so important, and putting this in the language of labor movements and labor unions, is because no tech companies, no data brokers are going to care if only a few people at a time try to exercise their rights or try to negotiate.
Sure.
If you don't act collectively, then it's just a race to the bottom. And so the point of DDP is to be the authorized agent for, hundreds of thousands, millions of American consumers to collectively bargain to take back that power from the technology companies, and hopefully be able to pay out data dividends for those who choose to share their data. This builds off of what Andrew Yang was saying on the campaign trail, which is, look, if you choose to go dark and not share any data with any technology company, that's your right. However, if you choose to share your data, why is it that the technology companies get to keep all of the profit? You should be able to share in that profit as well. And that's what led to the Data Dividend Project.
Yeah, I love it. I'll just say, well, number one, I'm glad you all are here, all three of you, and what your orgs are doing. I quite honestly feel exhausted from this whole conversation over the course of the past decade, but specific to even what you mentioned, the paper that came from Glenn Weil and Jaron Lanier. I think right before I met Glenn, the person who introduced me to Glenn is Jennifer Maroney, who's Matt Prewitt's colleague there at RadicalxChange. And she actually convinced me that data union was the right language in a meeting in Berkeley over coffee with Jaron Lanier. My old approach, again, about 10 years ago, was really going from the business side, because that was my background. I was a serial entrepreneur. I started a few tech companies, and we were starting a trade association to initially sort of lobby our way into large institutions with smaller institutions that wanted to help them be a better data controller or data actor. And so this whole sort of community that is growing, especially over the course of the past, I would say 36 months, has been extremely valuable. And I think at RadicalxChange first conference, that was where I met Shiv. And full disclosure, I'm on their advisory board for the Streamr network. But that doesn't mean we're going to be overly lighthearted about the conversations that we have. And so as a tech leader, a technologist, as the chief face of, and that's just what I would call you, and I don't know if that's inaccurate, of Streamr network. Shiv, tell us about what you all are doing at Streamr and how you're trying to hack, for lack of better words, but I think it's actually the proper word, the distribution problem of data and the assumed value that's tied to that data, whether we're calling it capital or not yet. So what are you doing? What's the Streamr network?
Yeah. So, James, you definitely go too far by calling me any kind of leader of any kind. Enoch and I had, you're right, there's a wonderful harmony between us and how we've used this term interchangeably between all four of us, the term being data union. And Enoch and I had a long chat a couple of weeks ago over, I think we have the same kind of aims or end goals, right? Which is that kind of getting people together to enforce their kind of collective rights, right? Because we know that people together is what makes the difference here in this case. But the difference in strategy is fairly apparent, and it might actually, I mean, it's like almost instantiated in our dress that we're wearing. Like Enoch's got the suit on, and I've got the Steve Jobs-esque kind of tech thing going on with the turtleneck. So I'm coming at it from the tech perspective, if you want, and because that's what the Streamr project has been about: real-time data infrastructure, right? And the problem that I came across 2 years ago, or the team came across, was there's no infrastructure for actually like individuals owning, controlling, and monetizing their data. It just doesn't exist. And famously, this British guy called Chris Downs, tried this like 2 decades ago in 2000. And how he did it was to, he went around downloading his data, and sometimes he had to like print stuff out. It was kind of, back in the day, even before Facebook. And he tried to sell it, and he'd sell it on eBay. And he was reflecting on it not so very long ago. And he said, look, the infrastructure for that just hasn't changed. So that's basically what we're trying to solve. We're trying to create a tech version of what Enoch is doing from the legal basis. And they're very complementary strategies in a sense. So we've created generic infrastructure that solves some basic tech problems. One of the main reasons why the tech isn't there is because it's actually really difficult to pay people in these micropayments. That's the number one problem. There are other problems that I won't go into, but moving the data around is another issue, right? How do you do that without like calling on Amazon, right? And then as an individual, suddenly you need an Amazon account, an AWS account to move your real-time data around. Too difficult, right? So we've created a generic sort of tool set that developers can use to build their own data unions, right? Because in the end, it's the product, the data product. If there's no buyers, if no one wants the data, if you want, then no one is going to be remunerated at the end of the day. So we've kind of created that generic infrastructure. People have come along and built data unions. The one that's most public at the moment and most finished off, if you want, is called Swash. It's a browser plugin. So you kind of download it, you're opting in, you put in a little bit of basic information. It pseudonymizes you. So you're not totally anonymous, but but your personal information is also not shared in that sense, the stuff that would identify you as an individual. And getting that ethical and privacy balance is really quite difficult. But it's why, for example, I think like you and Matt are on our board to like make sure that we're doing the right kind of things. and tied into the right kind of structures.
Yeah, so I love it. Number one, I think to further, at least from my perspective, dumb down what I think Streamr does for folks is if you think about any large platform company, or again, what we're calling a data controller in the policy language, as a broker between data providers as individuals, us, and data consumers, let's call it just people who want to buy access to what you are. These platform companies sort of serve as a go-between, and there's no transparency about the true market rates for that entity, the entity being data about you. And if you plug in Streamr style apps like Swash and other things that are being developed in the network, what you start to have is a decoupled, unaffiliated participant that is ensuring that the transaction between the provider and the provider again being us, and the consumer being someone who wants to know us, you start to create this more easy transaction, almost financial transaction of how that data moves. And as a result, you can negotiate with the data controller or the old data controller sort of what their piece of the pie is. And I can just tell you, as someone theorizing about this, I think that piece of the pie is a much smaller piece of the pie than what the people get. Now, I agree with what Shiv said, and I think a lot of this stuff is complementary, but in the community of people who deal in data, there's usually a lot of, fence sitting between the people who think that this is a technical problem and people who think that this is a legal problem. I'm glad that Enoch and Shiv in particular are having regular conversations about this. But Enoch, on the legal end, what are some of the policy barriers to you all being able to be the agent on behalf of these classes? At least barriers that you see right now that we may be able to change with the lobbying that Matt and company are doing, or just through setting more precedent with good legal arguments and in the public courts.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. This is definitely a cooperative endeavor that will require all angles to solve the problem. You have the top down that Matt mentioned, which is regulatory, legal from the federal government and from the states. You have the bottom up grassroots organizing, which DDP and Andrew Yang are trying to do. And then you have the tech solutions like Shiv, like the last two guests that you just had on, like with the culture app, et cetera. And so it's going to take an approach from every single angle in order to solve this problem. In terms of barriers for being authorized agents, right now, California is the only state law that explicitly calls out and permits consumers to designate authorized agents to act on their behalf. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other agents that have sprung up in the past. Like, for example, there's a company that I think that's called Delete Me, that if you sign up for their subscription, you can go and they will act as your agent to get you deleted from all of the data broker registries around the United States. So I don't know if there's necessarily that many policy barriers per se around authorized agents. I think really the bigger legal and regulatory issue that we see from DDP is codifying the privacy rights and codifying consumer rights to control and own their data. And there are, I think, 11 different bills floating around Congress, but of course, Congress isn't getting anything done right now. Yeah, and that's right, and which is why the states like California, like New York, like Washington, have taken matters into their own hands and have started proposing, if not passing, bills that give consumers control and ownership over their data and their data privacy. The California Consumer Privacy Act being one, the California Privacy Rights Act, which we call the CCPA 2.0, being another, which is on the ballot this November 3rd, 2020. So there's a lot of, I think, cultural, legal, regulatory, technological turnings that are happening in the last 24 to 36 months that are starting to shift the conversation towards people and consumers taking back power and control over their data For example, like with the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma.
Yeah, I can't stress enough that people should be watching that documentary. So, so Enoch or Matt, can an individual just sprout up in any locale and say, I'm gonna sue for, and have a fighting chance? I guess anyone can file a docket, but can they sue tomorrow and say that I'm seeking some form of, I'm just going to sum it all up as data redress? Is that a marketplace? I feel like that's the wrong language to use, and this question isn't well formed, but are there people actively coming to you all seeking the sort of services that the DDP is providing, or are you all pushing this out to them saying, we want to unionize you, we're asking for your endorsement to move forward as an agent? Like, well, how is that working? Are they?
Yeah, James, I mean, to be clear, there were class action lawsuits over data privacy and data breaches before the CCPA came into effect on January 1, 2020. And if you go to DDP's website, you can see that we are helping to publicize those lawsuits and those settlements. I'll give you two examples. A Yahoo data breach occurred back in 2014, 2013, 2012, and there was a $117 million settlement for anybody who had a Yahoo email address. And so most people don't know that your data is worth money, and that there are these class action lawsuits where you can go out and file claims. So we've helped publicize that. There was a Facebook Illinois biometric privacy settlement that just came out on Wednesday. That's $650 million for the residents of Illinois who had their face templates created and stored by Facebook. So you can go file a claim between September 23rd and November 23rd, and each individual claim could be worth as much as $400. So, that's real money. And people don't realize that their data is worth a lot of money. And these class action lawsuits were filed before DDP or the CCPA were even passed or came into existence. So that's one step, which is education and making people aware that your data is worth money, and that there are already these lawsuits out there, these class actions out there, that all you have to do is go and make a claim and you can get money for and redress for.
It might be that Matt wants to come in on the kind of stuff that RadicalxChange has been doing on the Data Freedom Act. But I was going to say what's happening over in Europe is also really, really fascinating. There is definitely now going to be a Data Services Act. I think that's what they're calling it now. Really dry. In next year. So the legislation for that will start to drop in the next couple of months or so. One of the things that might be in there, I stress might, but the European Commission has made it explicit that they do want this to happen, is this. So we have Article 20 GDPR, it's called the right to portability. And at the moment, this right means that, look, I got 30 days and a company has to give me my data, right? But they get to choose that length of time, obviously, and they usually stall it out till the end, and they get to choose the format, right? So this is not very helpful. It's certainly not a commercial thing that could be exploited. They want to update this. So they want API access, right? So real-time data, and programmatic access, which sounds like really super nerdy. And is that very useful? Yes, it is, because it means that, the way you can sign in with Google to another platform, right? Or Facebook or whatever, right? Imagine using just that system, but you're signing into a data union now, right? So you're shifting your Netflix data over to a data union, and it's like 3 clicks, and that's it. So you click yes, Netflix says, are you sure? And you go yes. Then you read the terms and conditions, obviously, of the data union. That's another thing, but that's the portability right that everyone around the world, I think, should have. Because, there's always, people kind of forget, there are two parties to the data creation. There's the site that you're on, and then there's you. It's just that you don't have very good tools to collect the information. You have the same, what's going on, right? While you're tapping and clicking, except you've got a pen and paper basically to record this stuff. So anything that makes it easier for the other party, i.e. us, the ordinary people, to collect that information and also have the same information that we're generating is incredibly useful. So I think this portability right is super powerful.
Yeah. Guys, we're coming up on our time here, but in the last 2 minutes, does anyone have any any final thoughts about actions that they're taking right now, or ways that we can sort of add support? We're obviously going to send around. I'm going to send around a series of emails about all of your orgs and what's happening. I'm really looking forward to figuring out how to work with Matt and company to lobby the people in New York, especially, to sort of get up to speed with what California is doing, even as some of that legislation may be flawed. But is there anything else that we should be focusing on with what's happening at Streamr Network or the DDP? Or
I'd say very quick, if you're a developer, get in touch, because you can build out a data union. So if you're a developer in this community, definitely get in touch.
Right. So we do. Yeah. We need a bank of developers. I know in my last panel, they actually have a group who asked me about that. And that's a great point. I need to put them in touch with you. Yeah. Matt, I don't know, you sort of lightened up on the screen. I don't know if you had something to say. It's like as when you wanted to speak, everything got light, and what?
Well, one thing I would say is that I think one of my great hopes is that I think that everyone should get involved in what Streamr's doing and what Enoch is doing, and start thinking about how to vindicate their rights to their data in a more serious way. But in addition to that, I want to send the message. I want to get the message out there that I also really hope that a broad public can kind of keep its eyes a little bit further downfield than maybe they're used to on this particular issue, because I think that it's just extremely important for the next several decades of our economy and our society. And and what I have to say about that is that what so many of the problems here have to do with races to the bottom. Yep. And where we really need to get to, and we're going to need help from forward-thinking legislators to get here, is we need a way for individuals and groups and unions and other kinds of representatives of data rights to be able to talk to each other and kind of come to a public interest, come to agreements in the public interest about how we want platforms to be using our data. And we need to create a situation in which the platforms need to do business with these kinds of representatives in order to get access to our data.
I love it.
So these are, these kind of, this is, as I was saying, a little bit farther downfield, but it's really important. I really want as many people as possible to kind of have this long game in their mind as we take these steps towards a better data economy.
On that note, on that call to action. Oh, go ahead, Enoch.
I was going to say for DDP, I think the easiest action item is to go to ddp4all.com. And if you like what you see there, to join the movement at DDP.
ddp4all.com. All right, so guys, again, I feel very apologetic. I wish we could talk for a good 2 hours and tumble way down the rabbit hole, but we'll try to find some other time to do it. Thanks for joining me, especially as you all are so very far apart. And we'll keep this up and turn it into activism. But till next time, thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, James.
Bye.